What's up, y'all? Welcome on into the GoVols247 Podcast. Wes Rucker coming to you from Fort Rucker Studio here on a chilly Thursday morning in God's own Knoxville, Tennessee. How are you? Hope you're well. Hope everything in your life is going all right. If you're a Tennessee Athletics fan, I would suggest that things are going right in your life right now. You've got a college football playoff coming up. You've got still celebrating a baseball national championship, and now it looks like you will have a men's basketball team ranked number 1 in the country. Don't want to say anything against the Lady Vols. They got some good stuff going on there too. They are still undefeated after a really nice kind of hold 'em off win Wednesday against Florida State. That one came down to the buzzer, and thought they were going to kind of run away with it. And then in the third quarter, they kind of messed around, played with the food a little bit. Seminoles came back, and then just a big final minute, and the Lady Vols pulled off a winner, and it was loud in Food City Center. You could hear it going through the TV. That was nice to hear some noise like that for a women's basketball game again at Tennessee. That was a good thing to hear. But we are here to talk men's basketball on this episode. The men's basketball team, which probably about to be ranked number 1. To do that, I think you know where we're going. We're going over to that unnamed home studio where the man's so busy that he can't decorate his walls is there. Ben McKee. Ben, how you doing this morning, man?
I'm doing great. Absolutely great. Not as busy this weekend. So maybe I'll have time to decorate my walls this weekend with no Tennessee men's basketball game, no Tennessee football game, and baseball getting their first month off for the first time in like 3 years. So who knows? Maybe I'll decorate my walls this weekend, although I'll be camped out on the couch watching college basketball, watching college football, because it is conference championship weekend. Not a ton of games, but several good games, both in college football and college basketball. So we typically, because we are covering Tennessee games, don't get to watch as much of the sport as we would like. So we'll take advantage of that when I can, and looking forward to spending some time with the family. I know Tennessee fans are really enjoying things right now, as you detailed. Tennessee going to be in the playoffs come Sunday. We'll see who and where they'll end up playing. Tennessee basketball going to be ranked number 1, the earliest in a season in all time in the program's history, being ranked number 1 in December, the earliest that will ever happen. And the Lady Vols looking like the Lady Vols last night. That was a very, very impressive win. A huge win. And I truly, that was my takeaway, is that the Lady Vols look like the Lady Vols. Gritty, tough, physical, battling through adversity when it hits, and just finding a way to win because of how strong they are mentally and physically. It looked like a Pat Summitt team, quite frankly. Just one game. Florida State, very good. Very, very big win for Kim Caldwell early on in her tenure. So the early returns are strong there. And then you mentioned baseball. We'll tie it all in together. When Tennessee is announced in the playoffs on Sunday, Tennessee will be the only school in America that I believe will have made it to the College World Series, be ranked in the top 25 in men's basketball, and also be in the playoffs. So the 3 men's sports doing really, really well. Just about as well as you can do. Certainly as well as you can do in one, winning the championship in baseball, and basketball and football. They have a legitimate shot at winning their own title.
Yeah, I look at like last night with that Lady Vols game, there were so many good men's games on last night that I was thinking like, okay, this is the Lady Vols' first kind of real test. I need to keep an eye on this. But I was like, man, there's so many like elite men's games on. Like there were so many like just bangers last night, you know, and with the not just the SEC, ACC, but also the Big East, Big 12 battle was going on. So, you know, you had a bunch of games there. But then what happened was ended up turning it on for the first half of the Lady Vols game because it was on first. And I was like, well, I didn't turn it off. So like I was second screening. I thought I might be second screening some of the Lady Vols game. I was prime screening the Lady Vols game, and I was second screening other games because first off, the Lady Vols were like, oh man, that first half, it was like they couldn't miss. They were like 8 of 20 from 3 to open the game, or 9 of 20, whatever it was. And then, you know, then I thought, okay, just when I was like, okay, I'm going to they're up by so much now that I'm gonna start watching other stuff. Florida State started pulling back into it, and I was like, okay, I need to make sure this isn't like some stuff that we've seen from the Lady Vols before, where when they get bad, it's really bad and things turn, and I got to see this. And then the fourth quarter ended up they pulled right back there and held them off, and it was just an exciting game. And the roar from Food City Center, Thompson Bowling Arena, you could hear the roar at the end of the game, like through the microphone on the TV, like it was loud. And I was just thinking, man, let's get some more butts in the seats there watching them, because they're fun. I don't know if they have enough pieces to really like win a championship or anything right now, but they've got enough pieces to compete, and they play a system that's really fun, really, really fun. And so they're going to be really, really fun to watch. And also the men's basketball team at Tennessee, still very, very fun to watch. Ben, I think you and I, this is probably the simplest way I can put this. I think you and I were both more bullish about the potential of this team than maybe other people were. And I think throughout the offseason, when people said, hey, this team might be taking a step back, I know I did, and I'm pretty sure I heard you also say, "Whoa, now let's wait and see. There's some pieces on this team. This team could be pretty good. Let's not go there yet." And even a couple weeks into the season, people were kind of qualifying everything they said about this team. They would say, "Oh, well, they don't have Dalton Connect, but they look competitive again, or look like another tournament team." And I was thinking there could be more there. Are we watching the same thing? Like, that team could be really good. But even me, and this is where I speak only for myself and throw it over to you, Ben, I am surprised at just how good they've been so far, especially because I think we can all see a million things they could do better. And they're still playing really good basketball. They're number 2 in most of the computer metrics. They'll be 1 probably in next week's poll after, Kansas and Auburn go down last night, and 4 and 5 lost the night before. I mean, it's I did not expect them to be sitting here at number 1 in the country going into mid-December. I just didn't expect that.
Yeah, I would say that there's not a million things that they need to work on. And I don't think that you meant it in the way that it came off. You were simply saying what I agree with, that there's still a long ways to go this season. They will need to continue to improve. There will be flaws that do pop up along the way. They're not a perfect team. So I understand what you're meaning. But just to kind of go off of that, that's why this team is so good, is because they don't have a million things that they need to work on, if that makes sense. They're number 2 in Ken
Yeah,
Palm
that's fair.
for a reason. They're number 9 in offensive efficiency. They're number 2 in defensive efficiency. And outside of the Indiana exhibition, they have steamrolled everybody. Virginia, Baylor, Syracuse, Louisville. Maybe there were some points and times in the first half where it felt close and felt like they weren't playing their best basketball. But overall, Tennessee has just wiped the floor with everybody they have played to this point, even against some good mid-major teams. And yes, they're expected to win those games, but they're beating up on the Austin Peay's of the world, the Montanas, that are going to have solid teams in their conferences this year, and in games where most would probably win by 20 to 30. Tennessee's winning by 40 and 50. They're just wiping the floor with everybody. And it's because, again, they're not a perfect team, and things will pop up as we progress. But there's not a lot of flaws with this basketball team. My only question mark with Tennessee right now is, does it have enough depth in the post? That is truly my only question mark with this team at this moment on December 5th, as we get ready to watch them play their next game at Madison Square Garden against Miami. And I will say, I'll rain on the parade a little bit. I do think they've benefited from a lighter schedule than maybe we initially thought when the schedule was created. And it's not Tennessee's fault, but Virginia is not at all what Virginia has been the last couple of years. Syracuse, not Syracuse basketball. Virginia is 102nd in Ken Palm. Syracuse is 104th. Tennessee's two best wins right now: Baylor, who is 23rd in KenPom, Louisville, 53rd in KenPom. Now, I will say that Louisville win does look better than I thought it would after Louisville played really well in the battle for Atlantis. And that win, unfortunately, is probably going to fade off a little bit because one of Louisville's best players, Kayshawn Pryor, who is very annoying, quite frankly, Wes and I talked about it after that game. He tore his ACL recently within the last week. So I expect Louisville to take a bit of a dip, but that Louisville win has aged well to this point. Baylor's still a nice win, obviously. They're 23rd in the country in KenPom, but many thought that was a top 5, top 10 team coming in the country. And then upcoming, Miami is not good either, who Tennessee will face in the Jimmy V Classic in New York on Tuesday. Not quite as good as we've seen Miami be the last couple of years. KenPom projects a 14-point win, 81-66 at the moment. Next Saturday will be a big test for Tennessee. They play at Illinois. Illinois 14th in KenPom. Yep. They are a strong team who has been battle tested early on this year as well. KenPom currently projects Tennessee to win that one by 3, 75-72. So I do think that Tennessee has benefited from a couple of teams not being what we thought that they would be. And again, no fault of their own. But when you look at the pieces, I've said since the summer, when everybody would ask, like, this team has the pieces to make a Final Four run and to duplicate what they did a season ago. And that's win an SEC championship. That's make it to the Elite Eight. This team absolutely has the pieces to do so. And there's a lot of talk about Chaz Lanier. Everybody very familiar with Zakai Ziegler. But I think the difference in Tennessee exceeding preseason expectations, they were already pretty lofty, right? They're picked 3rd in the SEC.
Yeah, they were somewhere around 10 nationally, somewhere 10, 12.
Yeah. Those are high expectations coming into a season. You knew they had a lot of good pieces, but why I think Tennessee has even exceeded those expectations and vaulted to number 1 in the country and right in the thick of it with Alabama and Auburn for best team in the league, I think is because Igor Milicic Jr. and Felix Okpara. I don't think people realized how good of a pickup those two guys were over the summer in the preseason for different reasons, right? Different games. I don't think Tennessee fans realized, and people outside of Knoxville, you saw the stats of block shots that he had at Ohio State, but I don't think people realize just how athletic he is and how much he can play off of Zakai Ziegler. That was an underrated pickup. I said at the time that Igor Milicic Jr. was an underrated pickup. Wes, if you'll do me a favor, if you can, pull up Cade Tyson's stats at North Carolina through his first month or so of the season. I had a friend text me and say that the stats were not very good a couple of weeks ago. I'm curious where they stand now. But
yeah,
I remember talking about it on our reaction podcast that Tennessee preferred, nitpicking, but Tennessee preferred Igor Milicic Jr. to Cade Tyson, and they went in that direction. And it was going to be an underrated pickup because people don't realize how versatile of an offensive player Igor is, and he has shown that thus far, and he's exceeded my expectations rebounding the basketball. He is a terrific rebounder. I did not anticipate that. But those pickups, Igor and Felix, flew under the radar while Chaz Lanier was what everybody talked about. And I think those two pieces alone, with some other guys stepping up, of course, Jordan Gainey and Cade Phillips, what those two guys are giving Tennessee off the bench right now has been critical and will be critical moving forward. But I think the biggest reason Tennessee has exceeded even lofty preseason expectations is because of those two underrated pickups in the transfer portal.
Yeah, Cade Tyson is right now averaging 3 points and 0.9 rebounds per game for UNC. And unfortunately, it does get worse. He has scored 2 points combined in the past 4 games. He played 3 minutes against Dayton, 1 minute against Auburn, 2 minutes against Michigan State, which was an overtime game, and 8 minutes against Alabama last night. So he has played, let's see, this is me doing math on the fly. I'm pretty sure he has played exactly 4 minutes per game in the past, actually a little less than 4 minutes per game, really, in the past 4 games, and has 2 combined points. So, yeah.
And Igor Igor is averaging 12.5 points per game, 7.1 rebounds, which leads the team, more than Felix Okpara at 6.6, 23 minutes a game, shooting 57% from the floor. He's only shooting 31% from three, but I think that will come up. He's a better three-point shooter than he's shot it thus far. I think as he becomes more comfortable and more comfortable with understanding what shots he can take in this system, understanding what shots Rick wants him to take, and Rick just wants him to take the open ones. He wants him to be more aggressive. So, it was a foreign concept back during portal season. Tennessee may want Igor more than Cade Tyson, and it's because they thought he was more versatile and played more of the position that Tennessee needed, which was that 4 spot, and Cade's more of an off-the-ball guy. And at the time, you thought you had a really, really great chance of landing Chaz Lanier. So, to me, Wes, I'm curious your thoughts on that. That again, for the millionth time, Igor, Felix, those two underrated additions in the portal is why Tennessee has exceeded preseason expectations.
I agree, and I was intrigued by Milicic because I saw some of the highlights. I'd be lying if I said I ever watched Charlotte play a full game. This isn't like in football with Jermon McCoy when like I'd watched Oregon State play 5 games and was like, this kid is really good. This kid's really good. This was nothing like that. I just had to go back and watch some film and look at some numbers, and I saw that when he was good, he was really good. And then he would have games where he just wasn't. And then I was like, okay, why is that? Well, Charlotte was very last nationally in tempo last season, slower than even Virginia, which think about this, Milicic began his career at Virginia, right? And then he goes to Charlotte. So he's played at like 2 of the 5 slowest paced programs in the country his entire career until now. So maybe he was like, I got to go somewhere where they're at least going to not, crawl the ball up the court. And I think you've seen him be able to do that. And I think in fairness to Cade Tyson, I think the way Tennessee plays might get him more looks than like the way North Carolina plays, because in Tennessee's offense, it's a little bit slower. Obviously, they're not going up and down the court just for layups. They're moving at a decent rate, but Tennessee's tempo numbers are off because Tennessee always will look to run if it can, but if it can't score in the first 5 seconds, then Rick wants them to back out and run a set. So he still wants to go get fast break points. He's just not one of these Oates guys or UNC guys where it's like shoot as quickly as you can every time.
It's only about getting out in transition and firing the ball off.
Yes, and if you get out fast and it's not open, back it out, make them play defense for 20 seconds or so. And so,
which I like.
I'm fine with that. Bruce Pearl often does that early or late too, depending on if he can get his team to understand that concept. Usually depends. Some years he can, some years he can't. And that was the case Tennessee too. Some years they understood it and some years they didn't. But I think bottom line is he fits very well what Tennessee wants. But I also think he's just a better player who, if he had been at places that had been able to use his talents before, would have been a much bigger player. And even against Syracuse, he looked like a guy who, if he hadn't, had a Tobe Awaka night where he was picking up a foul every 30 seconds on the floor, he might have had like a 20-20 game. I mean, he had a double-double comfortable. He had a double-double in like 17 minutes. And I think he only played like 18 or 19 total. So yeah, he's been so good that the all the stuff with Estrella has not been a problem yet. And I'll tell you, another guy that they've gotten just enough out of is Cade Phillips, who is offsetting that Estrella thing too, because he is blossoming into kind of the player that Tennessee staff thought he would be, and a lot of other staffs around the country did not think he would be this kind of a player, but Tennessee did, and that's why Greg Polensky told Rick Barnes, "You're going to love this kid. You're going to want this kid. He fits exactly what you want as a program. He's your kind of guy. He's our kind of guy. We need to get this kid." And so, yeah, I mean, I think there are. You wonder a little bit about the numbers there. That's why I think they got to get Dubar going, because I do think he has to be kind of an emergency 4. They need to get that going, because that way Meshack can play emergency 4, but he's so valuable on the, with the perimeter defense and other things, and that kind of roaming strong side linebacker role he can play on defense, or roaming weak side linebacker he can play on defense. I think you probably are gonna need Dubar more than you think you are, because as I watch these other teams around the league, Ben, Tennessee, it's fair if you want to put Tennessee number one in the country right now. I still think Auburn might be the best team in the country. That there's going to be a couple of games where Auburn's just going to not look great because they're just going to have one of those nights. But they are still hell on wheels to play, and they got a lot of options. And my point where I'm going with that is, depending on how games are officiated, teams like Auburn, Bama, they're going to get you in foul trouble. Kentucky runs good stuff. They're going to get you in a little foul trouble. And Kentucky's also like, what, 7th nationally in pace? They get up and down the floor. Pope runs good stuff. And, Florida State, there's a bunch of teams in this league that can give you a hard time and get you in some foul trouble. So you're going to need Dubar to play some minutes at the 4 pretty heavily in some games, I still think. So, but what we're talking about with all this stuff, Ben, is like potential problems, things that are like down the list of, okay, the base things are really good. So now, what are some things that could pop up and how are they going to get answered? Because that's how coaches think, is that. So, but the first top level things, your one concern, I have that too. And the second concern I have, it's not as high as the first one. I do think it'll get better as the season goes along, but I still think there's just a few too many dumb turnovers for my like. I think they need to get that cleaned up a little bit. That could be a problem because their stuff is so good that the dumb giveaways are the stuff you don't want. So that's probably my only two things where I'm like, okay, but I have no notes on defense. That looks really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to your point, the turnovers will naturally take care of themselves because, again, we're 8 games into the season, and it feels like they're clicking on all cylinders. And I know that they're not. Rick Barnes would certainly say that they're not, and they should not have that mindset. They do not want to be clicking on all cylinders on December 5th. They want to be clicking on all cylinders on March 5th. But for early season basketball, I think Tennessee is playing as well as they possibly can. They really are. And the point that I'm getting to about the turnovers is that they're 8 games in, and it's pretty remarkable that I think the newness of one another, the addition of the transfers, Cade Phillips stepping in, playing more minutes. I think that they're still trying to learn each other. We've talked about it here on the podcast. Rick Barnes talks about it nearly every press conference. This group of guys just has not played a ton of basketball, which has not been an issue for the past 2 teams. When you had Josiah and Santi firmly in the mix, you going back a couple of years, you had Olivier and Uros coming back. Last year you had Jonas and Tobe as well as guys who were in the program for multiple years. So that hasn't been an issue in terms of needing to grow together on the court. And although they've really taken it in stride and they are playing well despite not really knowing each other as well as they would like on the court, I feel like that is still leading to some of the silly turnovers. So I think that will correct itself naturally the more that they play basketball together. I think it's more that than to me, turnover is just it's no different than a quarterback who throws a ton of interceptions. I don't know that can really get coached out of you. I think it's kind of who you are. I think it's just naturally kind of who you are, and I feel the same way in basketball. Turning the basketball over, you just lack the skills to not turn the basketball over. And I don't think that's the case with this group. I think the vast majority of their turnovers is just early season stuff, and especially with this group because they have not played a ton of basketball together. So I think that will naturally take care of itself. But they do a lot of things well. I do agree with you. Auburn, Alabama. I'm not sure that Tennessee has the punch that those 2 teams have from top to bottom. I think those two teams have a little bit more explosiveness, especially on the offensive end. But Alabama still cannot play a lick of defense. It's not as bad as it has been the past couple of years, but it's still a huge question mark. I still think that Tennessee is the better overall team when you consider both sides of the floor. To me, Tennessee and Auburn are kind of 1A, 1B. And if I had to pick between the two, I would probably lean Auburn because I think they have a little more firepower offensively. And they have the cohesion thing that Tennessee currently lacks. A lot of those guys, they do have their fair share of newcomers in the mix, but there's a lot of returning faces as well in that Auburn lineup. But that's neither here nor there. Quite frankly, at the end of the day, Tennessee is very deserving of what will be the number one spot on Monday. And, I mentioned what they've been able to get out of Igor and Felix. Two other things that we can talk about on the other side of the break that really showed up in that dominating win over Syracuse is what they're getting off the bench from Cade Phillips and Jordan Gainey. That has been huge. And will continue to be huge, as I mentioned earlier, and you detailed a little bit with Cade. But the other thing, I think my biggest surprise with this team has been how good of a rebounding team they are. I thought they would be a good rebounding team. They usually are, but this I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but just the eye test off the top of my head, maybe one of Rick's better rebounding teams that he has had at Tennessee thus far. We'll see how it plays out, but again, I thought they would be good because a lot of rebounding just comes down to a knack for it and playing hard. That's what Cade Phillips has said multiple times this week, and that Rick's teams are going to play hard. But they really rebound the basketball well, and I think that has helped elevate them to another level this year as well. I mean, Syracuse's rebounding numbers were terrific going into that basketball game, and I wrote this in my takeaways. You would not have known that Syracuse was a good rebounding team, a great rebounding team going into that basketball game by watching them play in that basketball game. And I know Adrian Autry, Syracuse's coach, was not thrilled with the second half effort from Syracuse, and that certainly played a role. But I think part of that was because Tennessee just kind of took their soul from them and made them look like a not good rebounding team more than they failed to rebound the basketball, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that starts with the way Tennessee plays defense. It just kind of eventually takes the life out of you, is what it does. And there's I do want to make a point about something you just made that I do totally agree with, and I really want to mention that. But we are overdue for a break, so I'm going to step away for just a second here. We're going to pay some bills, listen to products, services, in-house ads, etc., and then we're going to come right back here and pick this conversation up right where it is right now, which is on soon-to-be number one Tennessee basketball here on the GoVols247 Podcast. Hashtag ad. Welcome back to the GoVols247 Podcast, brought to you by whatever products, services, and in-house ads you just heard a moment ago during that commercial break. Wes Rucker coming to you from Fort Rucker Studio, and Ben McKee coming to you from his perhaps soon-to-be decorated home studio over there at his lovely new home, where my wife and I are very rude and should have made them some dinner one night when they had just moved. And I don't know why that just now popped into my head, but it just now did. Just about any time that we think of someone who has moved or whatever, we always are like, oh, well, night dinner's on us. And we just didn't in this case. Maybe that's because having a toddler in our house has ruined everything in that way. We just forget to do stuff now. I don't know. But sorry about that, Ben. We should have. We'll probably send you some DoorDash or something one night now. So we're sorry about that. But we are here talking Tennessee basketball here on this cold Thursday in God's own Knoxville, Tennessee. Before we get right back into this discussion on Tennessee basketball, would like to give you just a quick heads up. If you could just, first off, 50% off on the site the rest of this month, by the way. So go on and get you some of that, get you some of that while it's good. That's great holiday gift giving is what that is. Please go do that. And please, if you don't hear us talk about this at the end of every episode, guys, the stuff that comes with the GoVols 24/7 subscription these days, you pay the annual stuff, you get Paramount Plus, which is in and of itself we're giving you, like, in the money that you're paying us, you're basically paying what, $50 a year if you do 50% off, and you're doing that. You're getting something that's worth two things that are each worth more than that much money. The Paramount Plus stuff is fantastic with all the stuff that's on that app, all the shows, all the Billy and Taylor Sheridan shows that everybody loves are on there. My son watches Paw Patrol on it a couple times a week, at least, as much as I'll let him, with all the other Nickelodeon stuff. And there's, MTV, BET, Smithsonian. There's just so many things that are on that network, that you can get live TV, the Champions League coverage, which is just top notch. We got some of the best pundits, as they call them, in all across Europe, and we got them on our team doing Champions League for America. It's fantastic stuff. You really got to go check that out. But please also go rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. I'll lower or minimize the spiel here because I just went on the other one, but please go rate, review, subscribe wherever you can get this podcast. You can get it. You can cast the Fine Pod. You can get this podcast. We're also on YouTube and on Facebook now, for the video, so you can still go get those components there too. And no matter how you're getting it, please rate, review, subscribe, leave a fresh review. That really helps. Also, tell your friends, please tell your friends. If you're already doing all that stuff, thank you. We love you. If not,
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Straight back into it here, Ben. I think if I can get my throat cleared here, I think one thing the past couple years, Tennessee usually started the season really, really well. And part of me thought, and I don't think wrongfully so at the time, it was the natural thing to think, was that Tennessee had so many new, or had so many old heads on its team, because that team had been together for 3, 4, 5 years in different ways. And you kind of looked at that and you thought, I think that's why maybe early in the season that they are so good, because they're playing teams that have a lot of newcomers, a lot of portal pieces, and Tennessee already knows the system, right? So Tennessee is playing some of its best ball early in the year, while other teams maybe are playing their best ball later in the year. And that maybe is why it looks like Tennessee is falling off a little bit in some ways. And it was a natural thing to think. It was fair, and it might be right to some extent. But now we're seeing this season that, well, Tennessee's got the same point guard. It's got Meshack. It's got a couple of the old heads, but mostly it's a brand new roster, and they're still doing it. So we can't just go back in those past couple of years and just say it was the old heads on the roster. Like, the way these guys are coached throughout the offseason, the way they're pushed, the way they're drilled, by the time they get to the season, they may not be the best versions of themselves, but they're a really good version of themselves. Like, these guys open seasons ready to play. Rick Barnes throws a schedule out there every year that demands that his teams be ready to play. And this season, even though the schedule hasn't been quite what you wanted it to be, it's still been fine. And Tennessee has been just mashing dudes.
They have, and I think it's a reminder of how good of a basketball program Rick Barnes has. I mean, it's no coincidence. I don't have the game notes in front of me, but anybody can go find Tennessee's recent game notes on utsports.com, and there's a section, if not an entire page or two, dedicated to how much Tennessee has won, basically since the COVID season, and even going back to Grant and Admirals last year, and even the year before that, when they broke through and won the SEC regular season title, won a share of it with Auburn, if I remember correctly. It's no coincidence that Tennessee is one of the winningest teams in the SEC, not one of the winningest team in the SEC for different portions of time since COVID year and even a little before that, depending on the different stats that you look at. Tennessee has been the best program in the SEC, and it's not by coincidence. I understand that Rick Barnes has his shortcomings here and there in March, but he's one of the best in the business, has been for a very, very long time. And this is just another reminder of that. that right now Tennessee basketball is the standard in the SEC. Auburn and Alabama, given that they have reached the Final Four and Tennessee has not, unfortunately for Tennessee, that they have a piece of that conversation as well. But I think in totality, over the last decade, Tennessee has been the standard in basketball, while Rick Barnes has been in Knoxville, and this year's is just another reminder of that. His ability to identify talent in the high school ranks and in the portal, and not just identify the talent, but identify the correct fits. You mentioned it in the first segment. Greg Polinsky telling Rick that Cade Phillips will fit exactly what you want in your program. Bishop Boswell, his tough-minded, tough-nosed mindset is exactly what this program is. And Zakai Ziegler, and the list goes on and on and on. It's well documented at this point how great of a job Tennessee has been at eyeing talent and then developing talent once it gets to campus. They haven't been perfect. They've swung and they've missed. They've struck out at the point guard position behind Zakai the last couple of years, certainly, and with some post players as well. But all in all, they just, the consistency is remarkable, and it's led to bigger and better things for this program. The brand is more recognizable more than ever, so you are able to go out over the offseason and get a Chaz Lanier, even if he is from the mid-state, beating out brands like Kentucky and Arkansas was kind of sniffing around there before he settled on his final three of Tennessee, Kentucky, and BYU. BYU was throwing crazy money around. Kentucky is Kentucky, and they were throwing crazy money around. And he chose to take less and come to Tennessee because he knew he would get developed at Tennessee. That was the difference. He's taken care of, don't get it twisted, but he could have gotten more elsewhere. But he knew that Tennessee was more about basketball than all the other stuff. And he knew he was going to get developed. He knew a year at Tennessee would help him more long-term than a little extra money in his pocket. So it's just remarkable what Rick Barnes has done for a decade now. And of course, it's not Rick. He has a tremendous coaching staff. Justin Gainey and Greg Polinsky's ability to coach and develop and game plan. Rod Clark, as we have talked about before, doesn't get enough credit for his basketball mind as well. He's an elite recruiter that I don't think Tennessee fans recognize enough of, but I also don't think that he gets enough credit for what he's able to add from an X's and O's standpoint as well. And he's kind of like the older brother too, because Rod's pretty young. I mean, he's in his early 30s, so he relates really well to these guys. And Rick Barnes' practices are no joke. And not that Gainey and Polinsky don't do it as well. They do.
You need a good cop.
Yes. Rod is the good cop, but he's also hard on them as well. But he's kind of he cools them down after a long day of Rick Barnes practices. So the staff over there is phenomenal, and it goes far beyond just the assistant coaches and Rick Barnes himself. I mean, Lucas Campbell, who is now technically an assistant coach, but the support staff is as good as it gets. It's the model of consistency in the SEC right now. The SEC is as good as it's ever been. The SEC is the best basketball conference in college basketball at the moment, and Tennessee is the standard right now. So for them to essentially pick up where they left off from a season ago, Wes, with new pieces playing a heavy role in it, I think it's just a credit to Rick Barnes and everybody in the program, and just really speaks to how great they have been and shows why they have been so great for so long.
Yeah, and I heard something really interesting last week. I was talking to someone who covers basketball both at the college and professional levels and the recruiting levels, and let's just call it a basketball guy, like a basketball junkie journalist guy. I'm not going to say who his name was because I didn't get permission at the time to say that I was going to talk about this, but he mentioned something that I thought I had never thought about, and I thought was really, really interesting. If you'll look at it, Polinsky got to Tennessee, 22 or 21, and then he got onto the full-time staff in 23. And if you look at that timeline, you'll see that in that time, what Tennessee's been doing. And I think part of the reason for that is someone told me that Polinsky, when he got to Tennessee, that what he does really, really well, and the biggest thing he's helped with, if I could straighten my hat out here, with that staff, is that he has gotten them more to understand. At least he's been banging on the table more for recruiting, like, fits, and not just like culture fits. That's always been a deal, but like not just going for these are the 3 or 4 best players that we like, but since we have this piece and this piece, what we need is this kind of piece to complement it. And that's where his NBA background comes into play, I think, is you're looking at sort of building a roster and the pieces that he could say, listen, do we like both these guys equally? Because if we do, we need to get that one more. And I think these are not things that like Tennessee staff like did not know until he talked about it. But I'm just saying, I heard that he's been really good at helping them prioritize in terms of which guys they want. And if you're looking at rosters that look much more complete now, it's because they're going after certain types of players to fit holes, which it sounds simple, but it's not like the default stance, right? Normally you start recruiting a couple guys at each position, and then you find guys you like, and if there are 3 or 4 of them and they all happen to be kind of wings, then you'll have a team full of wings. And how many times we sit there across the country, even Duke at times, and say, is Proctor really a point guard? Like, they don't have a real point guard, and that's hurt them a couple times this season. And so making sure that you don't just have coaches left to their own devices a lot of times would give you a roster full of 2s, 3s, and undersized 4s. Because that's where the most players are. That's where the guys that pop athletically, the guys that have all the length, the guys that, but then it's those other spots that sometimes, you get left out a little bit. And I think that's where Polinsky's really helped. They have a much more complete looking team. And I think his influence in the room has been part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that his NBA background has really aided them in their roster management and more so, I guess, roster construction in terms of the position versatility and how this position fits with that position. That's certainly something that has really benefited Tennessee. And like you said, not that Rick wasn't doing it beforehand, but just another excellent staff member that Rick Barnes has at his disposal to help him work through ideas and come to conclusions on this, that, or the other. So I would obviously I'm not I couldn't sit here and recite you every single staff in the country, but I promise you, if we did do a project of ranking every staff in the country, there aren't many, if any, that you would take over Rick Barnes' staff from top to bottom. And you talked about Cade earlier. I mean, that was somebody who was overlooked in his own backyard with Alabama. I mean, he comes from a family of Alabama people. Several members of his family played football at Alabama, and Alabama did not put in the effort to get him the way that Tennessee did. And Tennessee is certainly reaping the benefits from making that decision to bring Cade in. I think Jordan Ganey also falls a little bit under that tree as well, in the sense of when he committed. I remember talking about it on the podcast. Everybody thought that he was only coming to Tennessee because his dad was an assistant coach, and that certainly played a role and played a big role. But Rick Barnes believed that he could be a really good basketball player in his system, in his program, and Tennessee is reaping the benefits of both of those guys right now because they are at times flipping games on its head when they check in off the bench. They have been critical off the bench. I think Cade is one of the most exciting players to watch in the SEC that SEC fans don't know about yet. With his ability to throw down lobs and block shots and rebound the basketball and finish at the rim, he's an incredible athlete, and you're seeing the early returns of that. And Jordan Ganey is just so under control, and he's more than just a shooter. I always thought that And now that he's more comfortable in the system, you're seeing that his decision making, his just ability to make plays on both ends of the floor has been remarkable to start the season. And you have your faces of the program in the starting lineup, but again, like I mentioned at the tail end of the first segment, one of the reasons Tennessee has vaulted to number one in the country this quickly is because of what they are getting from Cade Phillips and Jordan Gainey off the bench. And as they get into more meaningful games down the stretch and get into March and play in tournament games, having that off the bench, and you would hope at some point you get Cam Carr going, you get Darlington Dubar going. I mean, Tennessee's going to be as deep as they come, which is a key ingredient to winning in March.
Yeah, and what I really like about Gainey is, when he goes in there and plays some at the one, like when Ziegler's on the bench, Ziegler has every pass in his bag. Like Ziegler's a guy who, he has the ability and the permission to do stuff that other players for Rick Barnes have just never been able to do, because that's how in sync they are. And because I think Rick Barnes also can be a cold, hard calculator and understand that, yeah, Zakai's going to do about 5 or 6 things a game that I'm not going to love, but more than half of them are going to work. And so it'll be all right. And so that's probably part of that. But what I mean by that is when Gainey comes in, he keeps it more basic when he's in there, but he's a backup point guard. That's what he's supposed to be doing. He makes the plays, the connections that are supposed to be there. He takes care of the ball. He moves it side to side. He hits the open man. If nothing else, he'll step up and hit a shot himself. And when a guy like Gainey is what your 5th scoring option, give or take, somewhere around there, you're in good shape, because that guy, if you're having to count on him to score like 18, 20 a game, I don't know if you're a Final Four team. If you are letting him sit there and score about 8, 9, 10 a game, and occasionally he pops up for like 18 or 20, then you're special, because that guy, you can't put extra bodies on that guy. You just can't do it, because there's other people that you gotta account for. And what he's doing, I said the other day, Ben, that he's kind of like, his athleticism to me is like, you see a baseball team that's got like a small guy who hits in like the 2 hole or the 8 hole, and he's not that, he doesn't look that big, but a couple times a year he hits the ball about 460 feet, and you go, what just happened? Like, that's what Gainey's athleticism is, because he'll go up and put one on your head, and he can get up and go, and he's fast, and he's explosive. He just doesn't show it a lot because he's smooth, and that's not his game. But he can get out there and do that. Like, he'll throw one down on your head. He'll do it. And there's just his confidence right now. He just needs to stay in this mode, because you know what? He's going to have a couple games that are going to be bad. All shooters do. He's just got to play through it. And if he does and don't get into one of those funks again, I think there's a really nice player there.
Yeah, a really nice player. And I would be surprised if he goes into a funk, because I don't even know that I would classify last year as a funk. I just don't know that he was completely comfortable in the system.
Fair.
And completely. I don't even know if saying that he didn't understand what Rick expected of him, because I don't think that was the case. But
He never played
just
defense that hard. He said that many times.
right, just learning to play for Rick Barnes. It just took some time for him, and now he is very comfortable playing for Rick Barnes. He's very comfortable in this system, and he's playing extremely well. He's a playmaker on both ends of the floor, and he's going to continue to be a key ingredient for this team.
Yeah, and there's a lot to like about a lot of the things that they are doing. I think there was one other point I wanted to make, and I think I'm already forgetting it. Really should have written it down, but it is the first time. It's going to be the first time in 5 years that they've gone to number one. I think they've been number 2 a couple times since then, but they have not gotten back to the summit and so that will be interesting. I still think Auburn might get some first place votes, maybe, but I think Tennessee is going to be number 1 in the polls. I don't think it'll be unanimous, but I do think Tennessee will be number 1. And it's weird. It's weird to me, because you watch Auburn and Alabama, and you watch Tennessee, and our eyes are always, almost always drawn to offense, right? They're almost always drawn to offense. That's what people really, really like watching in most sports. And you see how much firepower those teams have on offense, and even Kentucky to an extent. And you go, can Tennessee keep pace with those guys? But then you look at it and you go, well, other teams don't. Those teams aren't playing defense the way Tennessee does, and so it's a different kind of thing. But Tennessee is, looking at the stats, Tennessee is 9th in offensive efficiency right now, and that's not in tempo. In tempo, they're like 280, but they are efficient in what they're doing offensively, and defensively, they're ridiculous. They're right now second behind only Duke in terms of adjusted defensive efficiency. So that's big because, I mean, you look at this stuff right now, the way KenPom's got it sorted is there's kind of three or four tiers. Auburn and Tennessee are on their own tier right now. And then behind them, Duke and Gonzaga are on their own tier. And then you've got a third tier that's Houston and Iowa State. And then you got everybody else like Bama, Florida, Kansas behind that. But you've got like 3 or 4 pretty distinct tiers atop the country right now. And Tennessee and Auburn are at the top. And when you look at what we've seen so far this season, I think that might be the teams that have looked the 2 best in the country. So I think, again, KenPom's telling us what we're seeing is true. I think Auburn and Tennessee right now look like, the best 2 teams in the country, although Alabama just makes you uncomfortable because the way they play, they're going to hit shots. And when they do hit shots, they're really hard to beat. But, can you string that together? That's always the issue for me. But there's a lot of really good teams in this league. I mean, look, last thing I got, Ben, you go across the SEC right now. Auburn 1, Tennessee 2. This is KenPom. Bama 7, Florida 8, Kentucky 11, State 12. I mean, they're all right there. Ole Miss, A&M are in the top 25. Arkansas is kind of in a weird situation there with the new roster, and Adu and some other guys are going to get healthy. And it's still weird to say Adu when you're talking about Arkansas, but they're like around 40 right now. I think they'll probably get a little better when some guys get healthy. So, I mean, yeah, this league is, dude, this is going to be like the old school Big 12 where like teams with under 500 conference records are going to get in.
The SEC is a beast. Again, it's the best conference in the sport at the moment. It's pretty incredible how much how much the conference has grown within the sport within the last decade. A decade ago, it wasn't any close to being this good or cared about this much. It's been really cool to see the SEC grow as much as it has in college basketball. And it's going to be a fun conference slate for a couple of months, and theoretically should prepare all of the teams that make the NCAA tournament for the NCAA tournament, which will bode well down the stretch, of course. And Tennessee is going to be right in the thick of it the entire time because I think they're as good as anybody in the country. They can beat anybody in the country. And again, we'll see how this team continues to develop, good or bad. But as of today, I mean, I think they have a chance to win the national championship, make a Final Four run as much as anybody.
Yeah, and it's just so funny. Last thing, as soon as the new year starts, Tennessee gets right into it. That first SEC game is Arkansas, John Calipari coming to Food City Center, Thompson Bowling Arena, all that. That's what Jonas Adu, and that's you talk about starting off with a live wire. That one, the building should be unglued that night. So what a fun schedule. And there's so many fun trips down there. You look at this league schedule and you go, oh man, can't wait. Oh man, can't wait. These just look like fun games to cover. And Illinois next week also, and 2 weeks also looks like a fun game to cover. So I think we can leave it there. This is a lot to discuss. We tried to keep it confined to an hour, and I think we're going to do that. But this was, it's big times. When we recorded this or scheduled this to record, we didn't know that number 1 and number 2 were both going to go down the night we scheduled this, and that when we recorded, Tennessee was on its way to number 1 in the country. We didn't know that, but it worked out, I guess, right?
It did.
And I think with that, we will leave it right there. Thanks for being here, Ben. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Wesley.